Have you met Zeus yet?
No.
Zeus, say hi, buddy. Say hi. This is Zeus. Zeus is my service dog.
Oh,
Uh,
cool.
yeah, hi, buddy. Hi, buddy. And he is all kinds of anxious anytime I get on a meeting and he doesn't know who it is. So he has to come say
Uh,
hi and meet people. All right, off.
hey, come here. This is Lotus.
Oh, hey, Lotus. What's up, Pop?
She's a sweetheart. We rescued her about four right after I retired. But look at over here. Oh, she don't like
There we
cameras.
go. I get that. I get that. Me either. I got a
All
face for radio. That's why I like podcasts.
right. All right. Well, let's just kind of get into it. Hey, welcome back, y'all, to another podcast of Crashing Convos. We have David Boyd here. I've known David for a while now. We ride mountain bikes together. He's part of the Dirt Therapy Project, nonprofit that I am part of, and I've ridden with him. I finally got to ride with him in Tresso. I wasn't able to ride that last year because of some medical complications, as they say. So, welcome to the
Yeah.
podcast, David.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's good to be here. Good to be here. Long time coming. I know we started talking about this like last year, and now we're finally making it happen. So I appreciate the invitation and the persistence to stay on me to get scheduled.
Yeah, man. I mean that's one of the things is I mean I appreciate you being patient as well. I know most of the people I want to interview or they just have very busy schedules, so it's trying to get them just lined up with the stars and but yeah, man, I know we've had some conversations on the side, but I figured you'd be a good guest to have on to kind of dive deep into a little bit of one of the things that I like to cover here is mental health, like self improvement, kind of leveling up, addressing self accountability and what have you. And that's kind of you in your job jar.
Yeah, definitely. I've been working in that space, the personal development space. Um, now for about six years, helping lead men's retreats and men's coaching and um, workshop facilitating, online course development and execution, all those kinds of things. So that's kind of my jam after a difficult transition from the service and then into public safety and um, navigating the challenges that come with both of those lifestyles.
So yeah, tell me a little bit about that. I know everyone's transition from military service is a difficult one, some easier than others. But what was your transition like exiting the Marine Corps?
Uh, it was a whirlwind to say the least, man. So I enlisted right out of high school and had all plans to be a lifer. I was going to stay in, 30 plus years. They were going to have to trespass me from base and drag me off base at the end of my career. And unfortunately, when I went in, I was a crash fire rescue airport firefighter. For those who aren't familiar with that in the Marine Corps, it's a very small MOS, and there's two different sides of the air wing. One side where you get to deploy, and one side where you have to stay and make sure that the airfield can run back stateside, so pilots can train and stuff like that. And I ended up with station orders, and so I had to go out of my way to find a deployment. And so I went to Afghanistan as an individual augmentee, and came home from that. Life kind of fell apart for me. My typical Marine sob story. My ex-wife had an affair with my friend while I was gone. Spent all my deployment money. All that junior enlisted heartache that so many of us have faced. Unfortunately, after that, I moved back into barracks and kind of got into the single Marine life again, and started doing the things that I like to do again, play soccer, that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, my about 15 months before the end of my first contract, I was injured in a training accident and ended up having to have a few knee surgeries. Um, and one of those was at about 4 months before my EAS, and I broke my kneecap completely in half um, as a complication from my first surgery. And while I was at home on emergency leave when this happened from a death in the family. Um, and we had just gotten a new master guns who'd come into my unit, and he didn't know me. Like I was a pretty, not to toot my own horn, but I was a pretty good Marine. and he didn't know me. And when I came back from convalescent leave, he just essentially treated me like worthless because I was broken and I'd been on limited duty for a while. Um, and so my morale like went into the tank. I was like, man, like I'm hurt. Like I got hurt training originally. Like this is you know, it's unfair that you're treating me this way, even though I'm still performing the job that I can perform for our unit at a high level. And he kind of made my life hell for a while. Um, and after that, my doctor was like, "You're not getting any better because of the stress." I had a Navy doc, and he was like, "You're not getting any better because of the stress that your unit is putting on you." And I know that you want to make this a career. So 2 weeks before my EAS, my doctor was like, "I'm going to sign off for you to get out. We're going to put you back on full duty, and I'm going to sign off for you to get out and go home and get treatment through the VA so that you can get better and come in or come back because I know you want to be a career Marine." Um, and so that's what happened. My doctor was like, "Do not run a PFT. Do not do anything. Your job for the next 2 weeks is to check out, is to leave the military." And so I left. I left active duty with 2 weeks notice, with no plans other than to go home and try to get better. Nowhere to live, nowhere to nowhere to go. Call home. So those were my immediate challenges. Really, is that I had no job, I had nothing lined up. A lot of guys that get out after their first enlistment have been planning for it, since year one. And my goal was to stay in, and then life threw me a curveball, and so I ended up, moving home back to the Raleigh, North Carolina area, getting a job working as a bike mechanic at Dick's Sporting Goods. And then I was like, well, the only way I can make money right now is to go use my GI Bill. And so I went back to school, um, for a little while I worked at Dick's and kind of found my next career path. So, but I jettisoned my veteran identity for a very long time because of that. Because of the way that I got out. I went back into the reserves after I got better for a while, but then got into public safety and couldn't do both. So I kind of separated myself from the veteran community, the veteran identity, for probably 7 or 8 years after I left active duty.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand why you would do that too. It's like the thing you kind of invested in and you loved and wanted to, and forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth, you can change it if you want, but you kind of had this vested interest in it, and then just to be treated by the very entity that you were trying to, you know, essentially give your time and your life for, because you were kind of, pre- you wanted to do a career with it, and to be treated as such, I can imagine that why you didn't want to have anything to do with it after you got out. Um, what
Yeah,
did
it
you
was.
learn
I
from
mean,
about that experience?
so I don't think I learned the lesson that I needed to before I moved into my next space. To be honest with you, looking back now, I would say that the lessons that I learned through the military and the first responder worlds, is that like you can't love something that can't love you back. Um, I think so many of us veterans, first responders, we live for our careers. We love to show up to work. We like to go to PT. We like to go on deployments. We like to go chase bad guys. We like to put out fires. You name it. We love doing that, and we live to work rather than live to love the rest of our life outside the job. Um, and I think it took me a very, very long time to learn that I need to love my life outside the job, and that the job is a means to an end. Um, and there are definitely still times in life where that creeps in, but I think those are probably two of my biggest lessons that I learned, because the military and the rest of corporate America or local government, they'll replace you the minute you leave. Um, and you'll just have been somebody who was there. Um, and so really learning to love the rest of your life and live the rest of your life through things like mountain biking or weightlifting or sports or whatever you want to be or family, I think is one of the biggest and hardest lessons to learn, for me at least.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot to that, and I can as you're talking about that, I'm kind of thinking of um a question I was asked yesterday uh about my transition out of the military, and it was kind of similar in that way, kind of conflicting, but it was I didn't want anything to do with the military either when I got out. And the more I pushed away, it seems like the more people are found who are in the military. It doesn't help that I'm in San Antonio, so there's a lot of military installations here. Um, but it's I don't know how many times I've heard that where a shitty leader um, affects someone's psyche, career, or what have you, and like don't. I think that's one of the pitfalls of some leaders don't know how to um, adapt like their leadership styles. They just have one leadership style, and it usually like blunts the airman or the marine or whoever. What did you learn as a leader from that? Like just as a leader in general.
I think that the one of the most difficult parts for the military specifically is to meet people where they are. Like the military has a standard, right? Like you have to be able to run your PFT, you have to be able to shoot, you have to be able to be deployed at any moment in time. And so the military's job is to keep soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Guardians, Coast Guardsmen, all of them deployment ready at any moment, right? And when that's the standard, it's really difficult to like meet someone who's not meeting the standard and figure it out because your only goal as a leader is to make sure, hey, we're deployment ready. Everybody's been to dental, everybody's running their PFT, everybody's got their shots, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah,
But when you have a service member who's not meeting that standard, whether it's your physical fitness or mental health or whatever, like there's not enough that's done to meet that person to bring them to that standard. It's just like, hey, you're not meeting a standard, either figure it out or get out. Um, and so I learned from all of that a hell of a lot about empathy and compassion and kindness and leadership through those things. I've found that there's so much more that you can do for somebody when you can truly see them for who they are and what they bring to the table rather than just like, hey, you're a body in my unit and I have to make sure that I'm accountable for you and you've done all of you've checked all the boxes, if you will.
yeah, yeah. More so lately. I mean, granted, hindsight's always 2020, right? And I'm pretty sure this specific leader has hopefully done some growing since then, and kind of reflects on his career in a way to grow from it and not make the same mistakes, because we all make mistakes. I can name some that I've made in my service as well. Um, how did like I know you went into like becoming a first responder. It was at post school, or like we
Yeah. So when I got out, my goal was to get into the fire service locally. Um, my dad was a firefighter in the Air Force, and so I joined the Marine Corps and became firefighter as well. And I wanted to be a civilian firefighter way down the road once I retired. And so I was like, okay, well maybe my timeline is just accelerated through that. And I was living in the Southeast. Um, for those who are familiar with the good old boy system, that it seemed to be a lot of what I was running into. So this school was just kind of a space filler for me while I was transitioning and trying to find a firefighting job. And I applied for a number of them and would make it pretty far into the interview process. And then, their volunteers would get hired. And I get that. But I'm like, I've got tons of certifications already. I've got all this experience in the military, and I just couldn't get over the hump to get into a local fire department as a career firefighter. And so there was a job opening that I saw to become a 911 dispatcher, and I was like, "Oh man, that could be my in." You know, I could do this for a couple years and meet some people in the fire department, um, and then have my in for my career. And so I got into 911. I went through the academy. I spent a couple of years doing that, and during that time frame, realized that I wanted to become a police officer instead, which was quite shocking. Because if you would have told me in high school, as I was running from the cops after sneaking out of the house uh, in Cary, North Carolina, that one day I'd be chasing down people, that I would have told you were an idiot. But I found something in 911 and working with the police officers there that I was like, that reminds me of the brotherhood that I had in the military. Like being able to depend on somebody and put my life in somebody else's hands and be able to be there for somebody else, um, and to help people. I think the vast majority of cops get into law enforcement to help people, to truly, truly try to make a difference in somebody else's life. And so I had that pulling on my heartstrings for a while, and so I applied for the police department with Raleigh, and about 7 months later, I started the academy.
What was that experience like, being a 911 operator?
It is an interesting, interesting place to work, man. Um,
Bet.
our our 911 center was in the basement of our city hall, and so for 12 hours a day, I'm sitting in this dark room with 6 or 7 computer monitors all around me, and 2 keyboards, and three different mice, and a radio going off, and all sorts of stuff. And it's like you just never know what's going to happen next. Like, at least on the other side of the radio, like the police or fire EMS side, like, you're getting a dispatch. Somebody at 911 is like taking all the notes, and they've distilled whatever the issue is down into something comprehensible. But there was so many times where you pick up the phone and it's like, 911, what's the location of your emergency? And it's just somebody screaming on the other end of the line, because like, oh, like we just got robbed, or somebody just got shot or stabbed, or you know you're listening in on people's domestic arguments while they're trying to get help, or giving CPR instructions to somebody, whose grandma's dying on the other end of the line.
Oh,
Um, it was a crazy, crazy job, man. It was a lot more emotionally taxing than I thought it would have been, because there's no closure in that job. Like, if you're on the other side of the radio, police, fire, EMS, like you go to the call and then you see it all the way through. Like, whether it's to an arrest, or it's to a transport to the hospital, or it's a putting out the fire, or you know XYZ result. But in 911, it's like you hear everybody's worst day, and then you just move on to the next worst person, or next person's worst day of their life, over and over and over again for 12 hours. And you can go from, like I said, like, 1 minute you're giving CPR instructions, to the next minute somebody's upset because their neighbor's dog pooped in their lawn, and it's like this crazy adrenaline spike and hormone ride, uh, for 12 hours, where you're trying to help people, but manage your own stress levels and emotional responses to the things that you have to hear, or or deal with on just through a phone call, rather than being able to be there in person and help somebody.
what a like, man, just we could do a podcast just on all that alone. But like what are the like what did you have in place to like self-regulate, like, or were there resources in place that they had there, or like were you doing anything at the time to try to reset each day?
Honestly, I wasn't managing all of that well. Um, Bikes have always been my passion. I grew up racing BMX and riding dirt jumps and riding skate parks and all that kind of stuff. And so that's always been my outlet. And so like like on night shift, we were in downtown Raleigh, so I would bring my BMX bike and I would take my lunch break and I would just go like ride street in downtown Raleigh at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, to blow off some of that steam. But outside of work, it was bikes, and a lot of it was like recovering from the job. You know, I think that was, my journey with post traumatic stress started, you know, pre-military, into the military, and then in the first responder world. But I think that I was doing a lot of numbing out. I spent a lot of time playing video games or, surfing the internet, that kind of thing, when I was off duty, just trying to not be present with all the things that I dealt with, on a shift. Um, so I drank a lot. I will say that. Did a lot of drinking, a lot of drinking, a lot of sleeping, a lot of avoiding anything that I found emotionally challenging back then.
Yeah, that's the way a lot of people deal with it. That's one of the legal ways to cope with it, and it's one of the most accepted ways to cope with it, and it's one of the most detrimental ways, like not just like physiologically, um, mentally, many different levels, affects your sleep and everything. But I say that to say this because, yeah, that's what I did as well. You had this misconception that you slept better when you drank, um, but I don't say I'm glad, but it's that you're encapsulating also like your childhood kind of played into everything that you are today. That's one of the things that some people don't account for is their upbringing, their way, their view of the world and what have you is all, kind of um, um, instilled by the people that raise you.
Yeah, uh, that's something that I've spent a good part of the last probably 7 or 8 years really diving into personally. Through my own personal growth work. Um, is really taking a look at, like even the basics, or the very early pieces of life. I'm a student of psychology, pursuing my education to become a counselor for vets and first responders eventually. Um, and most of us just don't realize how, like, even in utero and the first 18 months of our life, how much that sets us up for our ability to connect with other people and to be in relationship with other people. And how much that continues on through, you know your adolescence and into early adulthood, of figuring out who you are as an individual, separate and apart from the belief systems, values, XYZ, that our parents have instilled in us, or our church, or our community, or our society, or especially for the young men and women who join the military. Like, that's a whole different set of values and beliefs and operating procedures that then get sometimes literally beaten into us during our time in boot camp and training in our first year or two in the military system. Um, and then having to find yourself after all of that and unravel all of that and say, well, this is who I am as Dave Boyd, without the title of Marine, firefighter, 911 dispatcher, police officer. Like, who am I at my core? What are my real values? What are my real belief systems? Beyond Semper Fidelis and honor, courage, commitment, and JJ did tie buckle for leadership traits and that kind of stuff, and really, really digging deep into those aspects of who I am. And I think that most of us, unfortunately, don't ever get the opportunity because we don't have the place or the safety emotionally to dive into those places, right? It's like do I really want to open Pandora's box and see what's in there? Or do I just want to stay with my operating system that I've downloaded at this point and just stay with it? Um, and they just accept that that's who I am.
Yeah, and that's one of the common things I heard from other veterans and just people in general, um, is they're afraid what they're gonna find. You know, they are afraid that they won't be able to stop crying or they may I say this often, and it's probably not my saying, but it's amazing what we get used to and what we like what stress levels we're used to operating at. And before you know it, it's just our norm. And people don't understand what their baseline should be, you know, what their stress level at a normal level should be at. And if you just continue to operate, then you usually find that limit through something like something just kind of blowing up or um I guess I say that to say this, like was there something that happened that you were like, all right, hold up, like I need to figure out what's going on here and really identify what this is because I'm starting to lose myself, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it was kind of a slow build for me, honestly. Like I saw like, like the SF world, they talk about like chasing the dragon, right? Like those guys love to deploy. They live for it, right? They live for that, movement to contact, all that kind of stuff. And I found myself in that moment or in that space. This was probably 2013, 2014, 15, 16, where I was like, I'm working extra jobs. Like I'm picking up off duty work as a police officer. I'm running around chasing bad guys no matter what. Like it's 4 o'clock in the morning. Like, hey, we're gonna go try warrants on these gang members that have outstanding warrants. Like there was no downtime for me. And then I'd get off duty, and I was fighting MMA at the time too. And so I'm going to the gym, working out multiple hours a day. You know, getting punched in the face, like living that adrenaline, hypervigilance roller coaster, both on and off duty. Um, and then, towards the end of that time period, I started seeing a lot more of the symptoms of that something wasn't right start creeping in, like
Yeah.
my switch, my anger switch was like hair trigger. It was like, my kids or my wife could say something insignificant, and all of a sudden my stress response was through the friggin' roof. um Never to the point of like aggression and violence, but I was angry. Like I could feel it welling up inside me, and I was like, that's not who I am as a person. um and then in 2018, I had an incident that truly shifted my, um or maybe didn't shift, but it brought to light what I think was the underlying problem for a lot of it was just a misalignment of my personal values with what I had to do as a police officer. Um, I stopped a guy for 50 and a 35 on a back road, um, that we knew was used by like organized retail theft, groups to get out of our town and onto a highway. Um, Car smelled like weed. I worked in North Carolina at the time, and so that was illegal. And so, um, I, had probable cause to search his car and had a check-in officer on the way to help me out with that. So we had more officers than we had suspects because there were two people in the car. And while I'm sitting there on the side of the road with this guy waiting, he keeps trying to reach, like take his hands off the steering wheel and reach for something over and over again. And then, I keep telling him like, hey, put your hands on the steering wheel, put your hands on the steering wheel. And then all of a sudden, like the fastest I've ever seen it done, guy takes his hand off the steering wheel and shoves his hand right behind his lower back. And like, this is the moment, right? This is what I've been preparing for. This is why I draw my pistol repeatedly before, shift every day. This is it. Like this guy's going for a gun. This is the moment. And so I pull my gun out and I put it next to his head through the window. And I'm like, if your hand doesn't come out empty, I'm gonna blow your head all over that steering wheel. And he's like, hey man, no, like he starts crying, like I don't have anything, I don't have a gun, I swear I don't have anything. I'm not gonna hurt you. And I'm like, okay, well, we're gonna sit here until your hand comes out and I get a check-in officer here. And so I'm standing here on the side of the road with this guy with my gun against his head, his girlfriend in the passenger seat screaming. I get my check-in officer there, I pull him out of the car, and his hand tries to go back behind his back again. And I'm like, oh God, here it is again. And then all of a sudden I see a big old brown bag of brown powder heroin fall to the ground. And all this guy was trying to do was hide this big bag of heroin so he didn't go to federal prison for the rest of his life. And I could have killed this guy over that bag of
Uh,
heroin. Like, would I have been justified legally? Absolutely. That, like, based on the totality of the circumstances, I would have been cleared in that shooting. But could I have lived with that morally as a man? And this bubbled up for years underneath the surface. Like, what am I doing? How do I do this? How do I reconcile what happened with who I believe I am as a person? Um, and it came to a head a few years, in 2020. I was reading a book um, at work in my office. I was a school resource officer at that time, and um, it's called To Be a Man. It's by Dr. Robert Masters, and in there's 3 chapters on successively on anger, aggression, and violence. And in the chapter on violence, he starts talking about young men that go into the military and how they're programmed to commit violence on behalf of the government, um, and how much of their humanity that programming takes away from them. And I just kind of lost it in that moment. I'd always recognized that, like, hey, the government trained me to perform XYZ, but not in that sense before of like they had to take away my humanity so that I could dehumanize the enemy, so that I could perform my job in Afghanistan, or I could perform my job as a police officer. And like, bad guys are the enemy, right? So I don't feel bad about arresting bad guys. I don't feel bad when I have to fight a bad guy. All those kinds of things. And that was the moment for me, sitting there in my office reading that book at work. I was like, yep, I can't do this anymore. Um, this doesn't align with who I am and how I want to show up in the world and what I want to do for the world um, anymore. And that doesn't mean that, I'm not saying all that to say like, oh, I hate cops now and I hate what they do. It's just like, for me, that wasn't, my heart wasn't in it anymore and my soul wasn't in it because of this long series of events that transpired over years. Um, and I had to have, kind of that come to Jesus meeting with myself and say, hey, what are we doing next? Where are we going from here?
yeah, I mean, I can't imagine like what it is to. I mean, you described one incident as far as you know I don't want to say a routine call, but any time you pull somebody over, like you have to go in with a certain sense of like you just got to be ready because you don't. Everyone is has to be assumed like they're a threat until they're not. Because if you kind of go in complacent, that's kind of where you see some of those tragic videos of where people cops getting fired upon, and I know it happens in reverse, but um at the same time, I think a lot of people do not understand, especially people that don't serve or don't know what it is to serve for something greater than yourself or like for protecting others, but always having to respond to a call and that could be your last call and having to do that over and over and over uh, on top of everything else that's going on in your life, like family relationship issues or anything else is kind of in the background, deaths in the family, all that's playing in the background, all these stressors, bills and everything, traffic. On top of that, you got to go to work or do a job, and then always have this stuff running in the background, and then you have all this stuff piling up, child, um, you know, your upbringing, the military career, and I mean that's just your example, but you got to factor all that in, and it's just every day. It's like you just don't know, and I say that to say this: like I understand, like when I've seen some of these uh unfortunate things that happen with cops and people, and sometimes maybe it's lack of training, but at the end of the day, like it's humans, right? Humans are having to deal with other humans and the unpredictability of it, and it's like a survival mechanism that we have instilled in us. Like, so I don't know, that's just a lot to factor in, and I also understand the fact that there are some people that shouldn't be in the job. There shouldn't be certain officers that are in the job that are doing it because of the ego and maybe like the idea of power. But there's also people like in medical that shouldn't be in medical. They maybe they went in for money or because somebody else made them do it, and you can tell like those people are like they're out of their character does not fit with what they're doing, and um, it was it's interesting to hear you kind of understand those things and then to continue to do like the self work and to read this book where understand like a different perspective and then you decide to do something about it as opposed to stay in there because that's a safe bet and it wouldn't be safe for
Yeah,
you or anybody else going forward possibly.
yeah. Um, you wholeheartedly agree with you. Like there are definitely people in every career that shouldn't be there, right? Like there's bad lawyers, there's bad doctors, there's bad mountain bike mechanics. You name it. The the difference obviously being that some professions hold other people's lives in their hands, you know, um, and there are definitely people that should not be wearing a badge. I will never argue that. And there's a infinite amount of training that police officers, firefighters, EMTs, military needs that the government doesn't provide. I think that the government is fantastic at providing training for the members of the military or public safety to accomplish their mission, right? But they do absolutely nothing to help you navigate the rest of your life after that mission is accomplished. And you know, you can go through all of the boot camp and all of the MOS training and all of those things that are available. But like, if you don't know how to navigate your emotions and how to unpack the things that you've seen and done and heard, um, like you can't survive any of those things, which is why so many of us are, addicted to drugs and alcohol or addicted to porn or addicted to video games or, hell, even there's like not to speak ill of him, but look at David Goggins. Like he is addicted to numbing out and driving through everything rather than facing it from the outside looking in. It's like what you've been through doesn't matter. Just keep going. And yeah, that's important. Like you have to be able to have that drive to keep going, but you also have to have the emotional capacity and the spiritual capacity to take a hard look at the things that are affecting you in your life that are putting you in that response. Um, because if you can't do that, like you're living a half life, you're missing half the human experience. Um, I always think that like there's the four big emotions for men, and it's happy, hungry, horny, and angry, right? And the vast majority of men don't have any emotional capacity outside of those four. But there's so much more to the human experience than those. And we're professionals at numbing out. we're professionals at avoiding anything that causes us discomfort, unless it's physical discomfort, which you know, we love to suffer a little bit, or we wouldn't have joined the military to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you on David Goggins. Just there is addiction to everything, and most people don't realize it until it's too late or it becomes a problem. And I was just talking about this with somebody yesterday. I had on the podcast. Just too much of anything is a bad thing, and there's a balance to it all. Like, um, as far as like emotions in men, yeah. I mean, I've heard some like men say that they feel like it'll make them less of a man if they allow themselves to cry or what have you. But I disagree with that. I think there's a time and place. Yes, there's a time to kind of hold it in, like move forward, compartmentalize, and do whatever needs to get done to, like, if there's an emergency or some type of high stress situation. But then I feel like there should be a place for it. Like, you got to find a place for it, because if you're too stressed out, you cannot think, you cannot logically like see outside yourself, then that builds, and you just kind of find yourself in that same situation where it just keeps building and building and building, and then you end up taking it out on people you love, as you stated earlier. I've done the same thing. Um, I've, I didn't have a tolerance for a whole lot, and it mainly came out on the ones I loved, because at work you're taught like how to be a professional, how to military bearing and all these things. But when you get home, you're just kind of like trying to take that mask off, if you will, and then walk in the door and just like, and then like something else comes in, whether it's like a bill wasn't paid, or didn't take the trash out or something, and it's just like catches you at the wrong time, and then you just blow up at this like most insignificant thing, and then you feel like an asshole afterwards, and then it's just like this repetitive cycle of like shame and guilt and anger, and if you never find a way to blow that valve off, if you will, in a positive way, then it just continues to grow and grow. I remember when I first started going to therapy, I had a therapist ask me a simple question, and I was so fucking angry about it. And it was just like, I think they asked, like, well, I don't think, they're like, how do you feel? And I was like, in my mind, I was like, what do you mean, how do I fucking feel? I'm obviously here. I'm not doing well, It was all these things that were like, like kind of fucking blowing off in my head. And but that just goes to show you, like, it's a simple question. But if you don't have the capacity, or you've never like really asked yourself that very basic question, like, that tells you something, that
Yeah,
something's not right.
yeah. I I can't tell you how often working in health development space, like working with men, working with vets, working with first responders, like I ask that same question. Like, and a lot of the same, like I get that, like the pissed off, like, well, fuck you, like, how am I supposed to feel? Like, and I'm like, I don't know, bro. Like, how are you supposed to feel? Um, but I think a lot of it really boils down to a really important word, and that's just safety. And that most people don't have a place in their life where they feel safe enough that they can even begin to look at that, because they have expectations of them at work, they have expectations of them at home, they have their own private personal expectations based on their programming, like we talked about a little while ago. And it's like all of those things induce shame or guilt. And when those things get introduced into the system, it makes us want to shut down even more and not face those things. And so it's like, well, you know, I guess I'm just going to stay where I'm at, right? Because there's two things that I know that all veterans and all first responders hate. First one is the way things are, and the second one is change. And in order for you to understand those things and develop a capacity to have your feelings or emotions, you have to be willing to be safe with yourself and with those around you. And then you have to be willing to change, because in order for you to go there to that place, change has to occur, because whatever you've been doing obviously hasn't been working, which is why we go to therapy, which is why we go to coaching, which is why we, you know, XYZ insert thing to cope. Um, but it's so hard to create safety for someone who doesn't know what that means, right? So many of us are traumatized, even if you haven't been labeled with or diagnosed with post traumatic stress or generalized anxiety disorder or depression or XYZ. We've all, in these career fields in the military first responder world, we've all been in places that weren't safe. And when we're not safe, we can't drop in and get out of our own way in order to understand those emotions and process them and label them. Like one of the things that I have guys do that struggle with that question of like, how are you feeling? I'm like, hey, here's I keep it on my phone in my favorite photos. Like, here's a ring of emotions. It's got six primary emotions and it's got like 100 secondary emotions. And I want you to set an alarm every 2 hours in your phone, and you're going to take 2 minutes and you're going to figure out how you feel in that moment, just to start building that understanding and that vocabulary of like, I can feel things and I can create some sort of safety, at least within my own physical body, at least for 2 minutes every 2 hours. um, so you're definitely not alone in that, my friend. You're definitely not alone in that response to the how are you feeling question.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing which leads us to like many arguments with people we love or coworkers or what have you. Like we unintentionally expect people to read our minds, or they should know what we're thinking, or they should know what I want next or anything like that. And when those expectations aren't met, that leads to arguments, and then it's just, but it and it's so obvious, right? Like there's not a whole lot of people that can read your mind. You know what I mean? Like, hey, I'm hungry. You should know I'm hungry. Like, where's my food at? And it's like, but that leads into an argument, or at least I'll speak for myself. I used to stuff like that, like, but those were, again, going back to conditioning and or programming, or whichever word we choose to use. But growing up, when that's the environment I was brought up in. Hey, the man works, and when you come home, like there's usually food or something, and which made sense for a little bit. But my mom and dad both worked, so they were always gone. So I usually had to do that, but I was still influenced by my uncles and my aunts and stuff, and that was the culture that was around it. And so I just um, adopted those beliefs and brought those into my relationship, along with a lot of other ones that were not healthy for any relationship that I was in. But it's just fascinating how or how malleable we are as humans, and we don't even realize like how things are affecting us. Like even just like with social media, what we choose to follow and who we choose to follow influence us in ways that we do not fully appreciate until we start saying some of these things, or we just start acting in some of these ways. And it's so choosing your circle is very important in what you choose to follow. It's kind of like
Yeah.
went back to the 911 thing you were talking about earlier. I'm pretty sure all those phone calls you received and all those experiences that you heard impacted your worldview and affected you on a physiological level. And it just, yeah, like you talked about, you were just going up and down and up and down. And because your body doesn't know any better. Your brain's just interpreting the information. And then if you factor that into any movies we watch, uh, or social media we choose to follow, what have you, it's all relevant, and a lot of people don't understand that.
Oh yeah, I mean, your amygdala is taking in like millions of pieces of data every day, all day, whether you're awake or asleep. Like, trying to figure out like, am I safe? Can that hurt me? Can that kill me? Like, and when we're repeatedly exposed or on edge waiting for an exposure to something, like our body never gets the chance to even back out, like you mentioned. It's like I'm up for a call, I'm back down, trying to recover from the call, or a deployment or anything like that. Like like you're sitting inside the fob, like waiting for the sirens to go off because there's mortars incoming, right? It's like it's so difficult for us to find a place where we can be safe again. I know I keep coming back to that word, but like safety is so important, not just physical, but emotional, spiritual, energetic safety. All of these things like tie together for our overall well-being. Um, and even like even when you're stateside, it's like when is Sergeant going to text and be like, hey, we've got XYZ, like show up at the motor pool, like with your rucksack, 0530, we're going on a 10-mile ruck tomorrow morning, right? Like versus, hey, like there's some stability, there's some normalcy in my day-to-day life as a military service member. Um, but that never comes. And so like, and I think on average it's like 72 hours that your body needs to like just clear out all those hormones. But how often do service members and first responders get 72 hours off where they don't have to worry about anything else, right? Like
Yeah.
even on leave, I remember being on leave and it's like, well, is my leave going to get canked because something happened back at base and I got to go back early? It's like how do I find space to truly take care of myself in any of these professions?
Yeah. And even like, I mean, of course, September 11th changed a lot, but just the idea of like, you see something, say something, or always be vigilant, all these things, but all these things factor into our everyday life, even when we're having dinner with our family, and when those things kind of hit like a high level, it starts to impact, where you get in arguments because again, going back to expectations, right? Um, I always want the seat looking towards the exits or towards the exit, and
Yeah.
um, that causes an argument at dinner, and it's just alcohol involved and everything else. But yeah, it's safe. Going back to the word safe, I mean, that is a key word because it's it seems to be rare for most service members, whether they realize it or not, like how on guard they are. And again, like what I talked about earlier, like it's amazing what you get used to. So if that's your um, everyday level, then the average American, like the other day, I was walking into Best Buy, and there was a kid walking out, and he was just on his phone. Like I walked right by him, he never looked up once. He will cross the street like that. Like he crossed the parking lot like that where there was like cars going by and stuff, but he never looked up. And I was just like, wow. Like, I mean, you could talk about addiction on one end, but the other side is just like maybe he feels that safe, where he could just walk across the parking lot without even looking up and not even see who I am or not even pay attention to what I have in my hand or anything. And
Yes. That makes me laugh, like, because I see that all the time too. Not just with the cell phone, but like people who are out in public, completely conditioned white, like not a care in the world. Just I'm happy to be in this moment. And it's like those of us in the military first responder world, it's just like I could never be that way. Like I always have this baseline of alertness of people around me, of looking at people's hips and looking at people's hands and what they're carrying, and do they have a bulge,
yeah,
all that kind of stuff. Are they carrying a fanny pack? Is it a tactical fanny pack that probably has a gun in it? All those kinds of things. And like from the neurobiological level, like we've created pathways in our brain, right? Like for those who aren't familiar with neuroplasticity, like we have the ability to change the way our brain functions by dedicating time and effort, mental effort into different things. So like if you want to learn to meditate or learn to play the guitar or anything like that, it takes time, right? Because you got to create these neural pathways, but we can do it in the same way on the reverse side. So like if we don't play the guitar for a while, like it goes downhill because our brain's like, we've only got so much processing power. We're going to get rid of this information or pieces of this information. But we're trained to do all those other things. We're trained to be on alert and to have our back towards the wall and face the door when we're sitting and watch people and their reactions and all that kind of stuff. And so we've created all these neural pathways that then inhibit our ability to come back down, to be the kid on the cell phone, to be the people in the restaurant just hanging out and talking and not worried about another thing that's going on besides their conversation. Um, so we have the and every time the other piece of that is that every time we use that training or that experience to watch people's hands or sit with our back to the wall or face the door or whatever, every time we survive, quote unquote, survive one of these experiences, that neural pathway is then reinforced because that behavior led to the desired outcome. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I'm pretty sure it releases a little bit of dopamine too.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because it's like, oh, I won, right?
Yeah.
What I chose to focus on here made me survive this moment in time, so I should do that again. And then it just gets like all of a sudden you've got like an 8-lane superhighway in your brain of a neural pathway. It's like, and you don't even think about those things, right? Like you automatically are just watching people and you're being hyper vigilant and checking on things rather than just being present and being in the moment.
Yeah, it backfired me once at the airport in Frankfurt. I was dropping some friends off at the airport. They were flying back home, and I wanted to make sure that before I left the airport that they actually left, didn't get delayed or what have you. And I was just walking around, just being me, looking around, and my, I guess my demeanor, the way I was walking around, the way I had, you know, the police come and question me for a little bit. I gave them my military ID. They checked it out and they asked me more questions, and then they finally let me go. But it was just the way I was walking around. I was paying attention to stuff. I guess I stuck out to them, and I was like, shit. Well, I can't just sit here on this bench, and I don't know. But anyways, I guess it kind of works against you sometimes as well, in more than one way.
Yeah. More than one way. More than one way. I would love to go back to something you mentioned, though, if it's okay, Simon.
What's
Um,
that?
I would love to go back to something that you mentioned a minute ago.
Oh yeah, of course.
You were talking about the um, like expectations, right? Like the man goes to work and he comes home and the dinner is ready, right?
Right.
Like I think one of the biggest struggles that a lot of us have in our transition are those expectations, which we call covert contracts. And it's like, if I do X, the other person I'm in relationship with will do Y, right? And in the
Right.
military, those are so common because we all know the expectations, right? Like we know that if we get told to show up to formation, we show up, they're going to tell us to do something, right?
Hmm.
But when we leave the service or the first responder world or whatever you want to call it, like those expectations aren't so cut and dry anymore. They're very like wishy-washy, if you will, unless you define them, right? Like one of my favorite ones, um, that I hear about from men sometimes is like, well, if I cut the lawn and I do the laundry and I dust and I do the dishes and I make dinner and pick the kids up, like my wife should have sex with me, right? Like that is a common expectation that if you
Yeah.
do some chores, that your wife will have sex with you. But the man or the husband has never communicated that to their spouse or their partner, right? Like, hey, if I do all these things, I would love some reciprocation and some physical touch, if you will, if we're going to go into the love languages. And then when they do all those things and their partner doesn't want to have sex with them, what happens? They
I'll
get
start
pissed
again.
off, right?
Yeah.
They get angry. They get hurt. Like what I did didn't matter because my wife didn't do X for me because I did Y for her. And so I think a lot of us in our world are set up for failure in relationship because of those things, because we know the expectations that we've had to live within for so long in the military or first responder world. And that's, tradition, SOP, UCMJ via or regulations, all those kinds of things. Like we know, but our partners outside the military or the first responder world don't know those things. And so I think that's a large piece of why so many of us have conflicts in relationships is because of all of these unexpressed expectations or covert contracts that we have with other people in our life. And then we hold them to those standards without expressing it. So I just wanted to touch on that for a minute since you
No,
mentioned it.
it's a great point. Uh, I'm not, I was just trying to get dinner. Nah, but I mean, no, that's a great point because again, like it's preconceived um what'd you call them, covert contracts?
Yeah, covert contracts.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like it's this expectation that X individual has, and I mean it could vary, right? But that's I guess one of the more common ones because kind of going back to the four H's, I think you said, like that meets one of them, and um yeah, but definitely like so with Uncivilized Heroes, did I say that right?
The uncivilized hero's journey. Yeah, that's uh,
Uncivilized Heroes
a re-
Journey. So you started that like and how like what does that look like when from like day one to the last day, like how do you start to enable the individual to start kind of deconstructing um and kind of analytically approaching their views and like enable them to kind of redirect or understand how some of those could be pitfalls.
yeah, good question. So um, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm the president of an international men's self development organization, and we host men's retreats, workshops, all those kind of things. And we've launched our very first um, workshop for veterans and first responders, which is taking place this Veterans Day weekend from November 9th to the 12th in the mountains of Colorado.
Nice.
And a big piece of that is creating the space for it because like we've talked about over the last hour or so is how much we live on the hypervigilance roller coaster, how we go from high highs to low lows, and there's never any place for men to be solely focused on just themselves. Like we're going to take care of the food, we're going to take care of the lodging, all that kind of stuff. All you need to do is be there, and we're going to give you the tools to start taking a look at all of these things. We're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about belief systems and values. We're going to talk about the experiences that you've had, which have been ingrained into your brain and into your body in order for you to respond the way that you have been previously. Um, we've got guys that are signed up that are like SWAT cops. We've got military veterans signed up. We've got firefighters signed up. Like they just need space first and foremost because we don't ever get that. Because even when we go on leave, right, we're still taking care of our family. We're still taking care of uh, emails from work, even though we shouldn't be. We're still focused. Like you get like 1 or 2 days into a 4 block or 96, and you're enjoying the first 2 days, and then you're worrying about, well, shit, I got to get back for formation, right?
Yeah.
Uh, by the end of this 96, and so a big piece of it is just creating that space that is just about them. It's just about their personal journey and understanding it and trying to make sense of it. but we've got 4 full days worth of awesome workshops. Um, we're gonna maybe go, depending on if the river's frozen, we might go do some cold plunging. We're gonna go on some hikes. We're gonna go sit. We're gonna talk. We're gonna learn new things about ourselves, about other people, how to be in relationship, how to create real contact with another person, not the sitting with my cell phone in front of me, still trying to talk to my wife about her day kind of contact, but to really be able to learn to be present with another human being, and more importantly, learn to be present with yourself. um, because I think so many of us struggle with just that capability to be okay with where you are when you are in your own skin.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds. I mean, that's awesome what you're doing and like how you're using um the natural elements to try to reset people. Just because I mean that's one of the things I found for myself, and that's one of the things that I didn't expect when I bought a mountain bike, on a whim, was to have that reconnection with something bigger than myself. And it continues to grow in that from that standpoint. Um it's helping me understand uh again, I'm still sifting through it, but my idea of God and like nature and like everything in between, everything from like chaos to, order and what have you. And I still continue to put threads on that, but it's one of the things that I didn't expect. And the more I kind of pull the threads, the more I understand like how we as a society, for the most part, are lost in the sense of not understanding that connection, what we have, what we are in nature, and how we need to kind of get back to it to maintain the balance, if you will. We lost the campfire, the stories we were telling, each other, um, that close knit, going to street together, like that tight knit group, the tribe, if you will. And it sounds like that's what you're trying to recreate, or one aspect of it you're trying to recreate, and also put modern terms to kind of apply and help people understand um, what they're processing and not processing.
Oh yeah, definitely. um, that was kind of the one of the bigger things for me too, getting into mountain biking a few years ago, is that connection with nature. I think that we have, um, evolutionarily speaking, like we're in a time that we're not prepared for. Like our bodies aren't designed to process all the information that we take in on a day-to-day basis, whether it's your 10th Zoom meeting for the day or your cell phone going off for the 50th time during the day. It's like we are meant to go back to that, like, am I safe? Can this kill me or can this hurt me? Like, that's what our brain is, 40,000 years worth of evolution is designed to think about. And it's got to process so much. And so, like, for me, when I get on my mountain bike and I'm out in, the middle of nowhere, 10 miles from the trailhead by myself, it's like, oh man, this is what life is about. Like, you can you can feel it somatically in your body, like, this big sigh, this big letdown. And I'd rather spend every Sunday on the trail than, communing with nature and the world and the universe and God, whatever you want to call it, than sitting
Yeah,
Sunday morning in a church pew. I've had more spiritual experiences on a mountain bike in the backcountry than I've ever had in a church, unfortunately. Um, but
yeah,
it's such, like, there's the nature deficit disorder is a real thing. Uh, I've talked to men who haven't put their feet in bare grass or in dirt in 20 years. And it's amazing just with that, just doing that, like putting your feet in the grass with no shoes or socks on, what that can do to help regulate your nervous system and your brain and body. But it's a wild, wild experience when you get to witness it or with a man for the first time.
yeah. I mean, you said a lot of things I agree with, and I've found more of an understanding of God. And I think a lot of people kind of get wrapped around the axle in the traditional sense of what when they hear the word God. I think it's very limited. Even the Bible, I think, limits it in many ways. But it's very like it's huge, like the universe, energy, all these different things. It's more than one thing for me. But with that, it's also like, just like you said, like just connecting, walking on bare grass. I try to do that every morning. Go out in the morning, walk out in the backyard, barefoot. Most of the time, I'm barefoot. And that's not something I used to do before. It's helped a ton with, my posture in the sense of like the way my feet, the dexterity, like of toes and what have you. And we're not really made to have shoes. I mean, shoes they're great. I don't like to have blisters and stuff like that, but and I'm not that extreme where I'm going to be walking across Moab or something barefoot. So I hope I'm not. But at the same time, it's that literal connection, and there's some science behind it with grounding. That even like I don't know if I've talked about this before, but Masudo Emoto, where he talks about water and like the energy forming water as it crystallizes. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so all those things, those are a lot of threads that I pulled on, and it kind of helps me paint this bigger picture on the wall, if you will, of like there's something bigger, right? I don't know what that is. I probably couldn't explain it right now if I tried, but I think that's what's the mystery and everything of it. And I think that's why it's important that we try to find a purpose. And it sounds like you are finding yours and trying to use your experiences to help others. And what is it? I'm kind of curious, like in some of the transformations you've seen and within the time that you've been doing in the past 5 or 6 years, like what is that experience like to see somebody start the program and then leave the program, like seemingly change, or like they reach back to you or their wives, like anything like that you can share with that? Not specifics, obviously, but
Yeah. It can be overwhelming at times. Um, we've had guys that were actively suicidal who have like come to our organization and are now, you know, sometimes 2, 3 years later, they're now helping men work through their lives and helping transform the lives of other men. And so it's 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 crazy how quick we can overcome when we're given the right space, the right opportunity, and the right support to be able to make these changes in our lives. Like there's nothing I love more than working with a guy, who's struggled within his relationships with his work, like 4 or 5, 6 months later, 6 months later, like get an email or a text message or a call or whatever, and they're like, my relationship is better than it's ever been before. Like not just with other people, but with myself. Like I don't hate myself anymore. Like I can understand who I am, where I am, and why I am at any given moment during the day. And that is to me like being able to be in touch with those pieces is probably the most important thing, the most important work we can do. Um, because so many of us shut ourselves off from the neck down and we live between the 6 inches in our ears and we forget about our heart, we forget about our gut, you know um, and learning to trust those other pieces of our nervous system and our body and our souls, if you will. Because most of us haven't ever been told that we have access to those pieces and they play a role in our decision making processes and they play a role in our happiness and our health. We're just like, let's logic our way out of every problem we've ever faced. And at the end of the day, that truly doesn't work. Um, and to like, I'll be honest, like sometimes I get pretty emotional when guys reach back out. Like, you know, and I'm perfectly okay with shedding a few tears for the homies that are out there doing good work because it makes me so proud um, that they're showing up for themselves and for everybody around them in a different way that's going to be healthier for the whole world um, at the end of the day.
yeah, and that's the thing, right? It's like like when I first got out of like treatment and stuff, and I started to kind of barely understand, and I still continue to understand like certain aspects of it. I wanted to try to go help people, right? I wanted to try to share what I knew because it was just like this information that I had, and I feel like I needed to share it right away. But then I still wasn't done doing like the work with it myself. And I understand now that it's like a lifetime process. Like you're never going to stop learning. You're never going to stop making mistakes. It's just like taking each opportunity and try to grow from it, and hopefully in a positive way as much as you can. But with that, I also understand like I never really understood like, well, someone can't give you what they don't have. And you can look at it from a materialistic standpoint, but more so like I can't truly love something if I don't love myself. And I didn't understand
Mm.
what that meant. And it's more so I went from a place of I didn't give a shit what happened to me. You know, try to take my life or what have you. And it was just like I can even if it happened the next day or whatever, I was at the point where I didn't care. But it's it's wild to fast forward and look back at that point in my life, and then like, man, if I were to like to be in a different place with it, right? I'm not saying I fear death. I guess we all should fear death a little bit, but at the same time, I would miss it. You know what I mean? I would miss, and then I didn't. I was just like at this place where everyone will be fine. What have you. But now that I continue to do the work and I appreciate more the people in my life. I understand like that I'm able to show love more to my loved ones more so than I did then. And it was one of those things that where I still every day I learned something. I appreciate that more and more. You can't give something that you don't have. So if you haven't done the work, then you can't really help anyone else do anything or teach them anything. And the best way like to go back is not telling them, it's just by displaying that, being that, and that is the best way to allow people to see it can be done, especially the people that seen a person's journey or the way they've grown from then to now or just throughout their life. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. Like when we talk about leadership in the coaching space, to me, right? Like it's helping people to find their path by shining a flashlight over their shoulder rather than walking in front of them because everybody's path is different, right? So like I'm there behind him, like, hey, let's find your path. Your path
Yeah.
doesn't have to look like my path, but we need to find the path that you need to be on for your personal growth. And the other piece of that, I like the way that you mentioned it. Like, you can only take people as far as you've gone in this work, right? Like, if if you haven't done your own deep work and understanding what makes you you, like you can't help somebody else that has that struggle. Um, and I think that's what's important about things like this, like the podcast, or you know, veterans and first responders leaving those career fields and getting into the helping professions because there's always going to be more people in those professions that need help and need people that have done it themselves, right? Like I get the struggles of a veteran, I get the struggles of firefighters, police, dispatchers, EMS because I've lived it. Just like you get the struggles of being a retired veteran, like, and you're leading people in down this path through the podcast by having you're sharing your story, having other people on to share their stories. Um, it's so incredibly important that like we all continue to be each other's keeper even after we take the uniform off for the last time, um, because we're all we've got, right? Nobody that hasn't worn the uniform can truly understand what we've been through. It's not saying that they can't help us, but they can't relate on that deep energetic level. That yeah, you've been shot at before too. You get it. Uh, you know what happened in your body, the same thing that happened in mine. Um, So I love that you're out there doing all your work and getting people on here to share their stories about their work, and um, it's it's a beautiful thing, man. And I just want to say thank you for what you do
Yeah,
on
man.
that side of things.
I appreciate what you do too, and that's why you're like, I asked you to be on here. And I truly feel that things don't happen like I try not to force anything. So like if something falls through, or like I've talked about before, I've had people where I've interviewed them and then afterwards like, hey, I changed my mind, or I'm not really comfortable with this. I'm like, man, we could delete it, like don't worry about it. We'll just delete it. Because at the end of the day, I find that it's not something that someone tells you. It's a lot of times it's what you say out loud that you never thought you would hear out loud. When it comes from within you and you say it, it resonates differently. And if that happens to the person, then so be it. That's hopefully that's a key to a door that they've been trying to unlock for a while, and they can find their way out of that door into the next one or what have you. But yeah, I appreciate what you're doing as well. And um, yeah, and I appreciate you sharing a lot of that, your experience with it. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we can dive deep into, but maybe we'll save some of that for next time. Um, so when is you said your retreat is November 8th and 9th in Colorado?
Yeah, 9th through the 12th.
9th through the
Um,
12th.
yeah, if you're interested, feel free. You can shoot me an email at dave@manuncivilized.com, or shoot me a direct message on Instagram at uncivilized_Dave, or you can check out the webpage at www.manuncivilized.com/heroes journey. And that's HEROES journey. More than happy to chat with anybody, talk through financial concerns, anything like that. Um, I'm trying to get more guys out there doing the work, um, because we need we need the leadership that veterans and first responders have to offer. That healthy leadership. Um, we've learned a lot, we've experienced a lot, and we need as much of them out there leading in their communities as possible in a healthy way.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming on, and hopefully have you on again and talk about where you're at then, and maybe dive into some other things that we kind of left lingering questions on with your experience or what have you.
Yeah, man. Anytime, just let me know. Happy to come back.
Yes, sir. All right, man. Well, have fun out there. Enjoy Colorado and try to stay warm. It's still hot as hell down here in Texas.
Sounds good, man.